Welcome, everyone, to my first podcast called Pug, Fireball, and Company. My guest today is Jeffrey Dunn, an accomplished author and a retired educator in 3 states. He also happens to be my younger brother. Good afternoon, Jeffrey. Please tell us why and when you decided to become an author.
I was a happy child, and then my mom took me to kindergarten. And I don't know, do you know this story? You've probably read this story at this point, Steve.
Yeah, I've heard it, yeah.
You've heard this story, yes. So we get to hear it again. Lucky you. So I went kindergarten the very, very first day, and I cried, and there were other people crying, little kids, and we went in and we sat in our chairs and we did our half day, and then we went home. And the second day, what I recall is I showed up and there were still some kids crying, and I thought they were dumb because obviously I'd learned that didn't work. And so I just hung tight. And the third day, I again learning my lessons as I go. The teacher turned her back. Miss Landau. There was a kindergarten teacher. She had I think of her as having on a red fright wig. She was a scary thing to me. Um, she didn't scare us other than by visual, but she turned her back and I ran home. So I got home and there's my mom, and what the heck are you doing here? And I don't know, I came home and I want to be there. Well, you got to go back tomorrow. Well, I described that was like they cut the umbilical cord. It was all over. I was done, and I hated school. Hated, just hated, to the point of being sick to my stomach. For the worst night was Sunday night at the end of Wide World of Color, the Disney show. And the minute that was over, I started to get sick because I had to go back to school. So I did my time till 9th grade, and we had this teacher, David Strelick, and he was new. It was his very first year teaching. He'd gone to college to stay away from the draft, and then he became a teacher, which also got him a deferment. And we were there on the very first day. And what I remember was the first thing he did was he took the grammar book. We were on the second floor, and he dropped it out the window, and he got in trouble with the principal because he was dropping books out the window. Because the principal's office was right underneath our room. And I knew I needed to pay attention to this man because I thought he was pretty cool. He got in trouble with the principal. He was all right. So he did all sorts of unorthodox things along with that. He read us Winnie the Pooh, and one day he read us In Watermelon Sugar by Richard Brautigan, and it was so imaginative and so interesting, and the speaker was so cool, and his girlfriend was so cool that I wanted to live in a shack and be like the speaker and be like Richard Brautigan. And I wrote a short story, and it was our final project. And he didn't ask for short stories. He just said, write something about the book. Well, I wrote a short story and turned it in. And the minute I handed it to him, he read it to the class. And since then, it's my thing. I haven't made money doing it. I was a teacher for 41 years of high school kids who I dearly love and miss. But at that point, when I have free time, I need to have my imagination do something. And I've always been writing something, short stories, novels, poetry, stuff, since then. And since I've retired, I could get more serious about it. There we go. There's the long story.
So in a way, it all started back. Yeah, so it all started back in high school in Lower Borough, Pennsylvania.
Lower Borough, Pennsylvania. Yep.
Which, for the people who don't know where that is, give them a sense of where that is.
So Lower Borough is 20 minutes of north of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. It's Appalachia. So I went to school with coal miner kids, with steelworker kids. Stephen, my parents' father, worked for Alcoa. We lived in a very middle class neighborhood, And so we had those folks in Lower Burl, and then we had some very, very, very working class kids, and we all came together in middle school and high school, and tried to figure out how to get along. And I'm going back for my 50th reunion, so we'll see if we've learned anything in the last 50 years.
Yes, and I hear you're going to take a train, aren't you?
Oh, yes. So my son, he said, well, I wasn't sure I wanted to do this. I remembered my father went to his 50th and it was a big deal. And I brought it up to my son Beck, and he said, well, we should take a train. And I go, what? He goes, I don't want to fly. I don't like flying, but why don't we take a train? I said, you want to go? He goes, sure, let's go. So we got Amtrak, and we're lucky the Amtrak runs right through Spokane, and we'll get on at 1 a.m, because you get on whenever the train rolls through, and go to Chicago, and Chicago to Pittsburgh, and 2.5 days later we'll be there at 6 a.m. in Pittsburgh. So
2.5 day trip by train. Oh, okay. What kind of process do you use in writing and publishing a book? Or is there any defined process?
there are as many processes as there are people. um, so what I'll do, I did a long-winded story about how I started doing all this writing stuff. I'll try and shorten this down because we could do 3 or 4 hours on this question, and you don't need to do that. But just starting with writing, writing is just typing or a pen or a turkey feather or whatever, and just making marks on paper that somebody else can make some sense of, and starting with you. I mean, that's writing, and everybody's got a different process. I don't use an outline. I have an idea, and it changes in my head from day to day to hour, and I start, and whatever I lay down, then I move on from there. I kind of do about 300 words to start. The way I describe this, I do like 300 words, and I come back to it the next day and I revise it, and then I do another 100 to 300 words, and then I come back, but I start from the beginning because I want to maintain the flow. And I do that till I have about 10 pages, and then I go back, and I can pick up from there. I don't have to go all the way back to the beginning anymore, but I'm always about 10 pages back, and always revising as I go, and then adding a little as I go, and that's kind of where I get.
You start any time of the day, any certain time of the day, or just whenever you can fit it into your schedule?
Yeah, I'm an old man and I'm retired, so luckily I don't have a schedule. That's why I could get more serious. But morning, just because I'm old, morning's my best time. I mean, if I'm going to be serious about what I'm doing creatively, it's got to be in the morning. It just does. And then I save other stuff for the afternoon, and I don't do anything in the evening. Although, if you've got a mind like mine, sometimes the best writing happens when I'm in the shower, because my brain just keeps working and it solves problems. I don't intend to do it that way, but it doesn't make any difference. Because when I come back in the morning and I see things I didn't see, I add stuff I didn't think about. I mean, it's evolves, and I just let it evolve. I just let it go. Publishing,
What does, yeah, publishing.
yeah. Move on to that publishing thing, and jump in here and shut me up and add whenever you want to. I won't be up. I won't be upset. That won't bother me. But publishing is a whole different, and you and I have been bouncing back and forth about all of this. The place to start for cheap is you can publish a book that ends up on Amazon and ends up, with a place like Ingram Spark or whatever. You can do all of that if you have an incredible amount of energy and patience for very, very little money by self-publishing. And I've done that with 2 books, and maybe I spent $300. I mean, there's freeware. There's some things you need to do along the way. It can be really complicated and very discouraging just to get the tech to work. But it's doable, if you've got the chutzpah and the patience for it. Another route to go, there's vanity publishing. If you've got money, you can find somebody to print a book. That's not a problem. That's easy to do. Anybody will print a book if you pay them. There's another thing called hybrid publishing, and these are publishers who you pay. Essentially, you're hiring a publishing company and you're starting your own business. You're funding yourself, and you're betting on yourself, just like starting a business. And if you find a reputable hybrid publisher, and watch out, there are sharks everywhere. But if you find one, and I have one, Izzard Inc., they have contacts to people who do book covers who are brilliant, and people who do interior design work and developmental editors and all of the stuff that a big publishing house has. But you just pay for it all up front and just bet on yourself. And then they help do a lot of that difficult stuff of self-publishing for you in the process. There's that. I know that you could jump in here. I mean, the end of this equation is that you can find a traditional publisher who will take this on. That's harder and harder and harder to do, because they don't want, in general, traditional publishers don't want you unless you already have a following. You've got 20,000 Facegram and Instagram followers. You already have a track record. And if you're starting, you don't have one. I mean, that's just kind of the way it is. And you've done something you can talk about, and that's through Amazon, and that's something I've not experienced, but you've had a fairly good experience doing that. So tell your listeners all about them. What have they done for you?
Well, it's called Amazon Books Publishing. It's an affiliate of Amazon, but they've also put the book on Ingram Spark and Lulu.com, so it's available on other platforms as well as Amazon. I had a professional proofreader from California actually edited the text before I gave it to Amazon Books Publishing, and I still correspond with her occasionally. But they designed the cover, they formatted it. They've also made a Facebook page for the book. Well, the book has a website now, pugfireballandcompany.com. You can find out more about me, the book. It's got several blogs about baseball in general, other stuff I've written that's related to Des Moines baseball players who at one time or another played in Des Moines even for 6 months. Twitter, yeah, that's especially really is PR.
And they did PR for you.
So it's got an Instagram page, Facebook page, Twitter, and the website. So now I'm getting into podcasting. So hopefully I'll podcast. I got 2 feature podcasts lined up. The Sam Burnaby, the president general manager of the Iowa Cubs, the AAA affiliate of the Chicago Cubs in Des Moines, and John Liapa, noted Iowa baseball historian. He lives in Des Moines. He's also a member of the Society for American Baseball Research. I've been a member of that since 2014, so it's for baseball nerds like me and John. Getting back to you, what are your favorite genres?
Okay, let me throw in one thing that your listeners would probably want to know, and it's about money. Our back and forth has educated me that Amazon is so efficient what they do, and that's code for they use a lot of AI, is they're able to offer somebody like my brother a good package for about half the price of a hybrid publisher. And so, because there's the whole thing, of course, you get all this done, and what do you do for PR? And PR firms are generally about $4,000 a month, and they're usually for about 3 months. And again, there are a lot of sharks.
This has been about half that cost.
But you got some decent PR for your book, which was wonderful. Yeah. This has been about half, not counting all the PR. That's a whole other story. But you've had the PR on top of it, so it at least financially, it's been a good deal for you. I mean, that's what I've experienced just watching what you're doing. So that's cool.
And everything they do, I do get to see what they come up with first before it goes live. And since even if they're doing it with AI, I don't know. Sounds like they're doing it with people. Who knows? But I get a chance to see everything they produce and I've changed things. There's been discrepancies and or just plain out false, not facts. And so I've had to correct, things, factual things that only I or somebody who's familiar with Des Moines baseball would know about, as far as players, their names, when they played here.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I know you're into fiction and poetry mainly, and why is that?
Well, if you're, I can tell you what I write, and then there's what I read. They're two different things. And I'll start with reading. Um, I am luckily, even still at my age, I am so easily bored, and I read a lot of natural history, a lot of brain research because it's just fascinating to me, and a lot of art history, a lot of biographies on authors. I read more nonfiction than fiction because all those facts then fuel my fiction. So I call what I do place based fiction, which means I start with a place. And one of my weaknesses is character. I have characters, but I don't have a lot of depth to start with because I don't really care. Just, I mean, they're interesting as thumbnails, as caricatures, and the things they get into are interesting. But it's the settings that really. My first book, Radio Free Olympia, my first major book, is all on the Olympic Peninsula in Washington State. This one's in Appalachian, the next one's in Central Washington, but it's the place where it all starts from. And it's the play. I'm trying to give the place essentially a voice in a way. But then I read a lot of magical realism, and I used to read a lot of poetry, but not so much anymore. Very specific kinds of things occasionally I'll read, but magical realism, Sherman Alexie, things like that are very cool. Then writing wise, it's the way my brain works. I'm dyslexic. I'm convinced that my father, my grandfather, my great grandfather on the Dunn side were all dyslexics. We all fit the profile. We're all visualizers. We're all theoreticians. I'm a wordsmith. I don't work in metal like my father and my grandfather. And grandfathers before them were all blacksmiths. But I think of what I do very much like an engineer does, even though it's words, which saying a dyslexic's a writer seems weird, but it makes sense to me. And my brain just goes places and makes up stories. I don't have a great verbal memory, which is you would think is weird, but what I mostly have is a visual memory, and then over time I've just absorbed enough words that it's work to get everything to fit together, but it's a work it's fun to do, so it's all good.
How many books have you written and published?
So I've got 4 published, and one will be out probably May or June of next year. It's I just finished a developmental edit on that today, literally just an hour ago. I got to the end and said, "Yep, there we go." Now I can send it back to my publisher.
In 25 words or less, how would you describe each book?
Each book, I may not do that, but it'll at least keep me in the barnyard. The first one's Dream Fishing the Little Spokane, and it's short stories. They're very surreal. It's as if, and it's local. It's like the Little Spokane River is down the hill from me, and it's that drainage. And it's like take a walk along the Little Spokane, and where does your brain go while you're taking a nature walk? To the extent that because it's surreal, um, Carl Jung comes to the Little Spokane River in his red sports car with his mom and drives up the river. On the river. There aren't any roads. He drives on the river. Well, it's a dream, so I can do whatever I want. Walt Whitman shows up and talks with an Indian chief from this area. Anais Nin shows up, the famous Henry Miller friend and pornographer. So they all come to Spokane, and all sorts of other strange short stories populate the book. The second one's poetry, hubcap collection plate, which is essentially I left out. I also just made books from scratch, where I've laid everything out. I printed them, I've sewn them together. They're chapbooks, is what they're called. And I had little chapbooks of poems, and I just put the chapbooks together into what's called hubcap collection plate. And it's just, you just have to, they're all different because they're like 5 little books in one. But it should tell you something. It's a collection plate, but it's a hubcap. So it's kind of like, call it hobo poetry. We'll call it that. Very, very Spokane in nature, or Central Washington, or whatever you want to call it. The big one, it's a Joycean thing, like Ulysses. This one's really hard to boil down, but I will do it. It's a challenge. I like a challenge. Radio Free Olympia, the Washington. If you come to Washington State and you go to the Pacific Coast, there's something called the Olympic Peninsula. It is a rainforest. It's the only temperate rainforest in the United States, and it's absolutely magical and totally frightening. You want to let your imagination go, that's the place to go. So there's 2 plot lines real fast. One is a foundling who watches up on a beach, and he puts together a pirate radio transmitter and hikes through the Olympic Peninsula and transmits its voices. So there are folklore characters, there are historical characters who passed away. All these things get broadcast, and then down range, it's his broadcasts are picked up by a woman named Bay, who's running an all-women's roadhouse convent, for lack of a better term, where she's collecting wayward women on a cranberry farm. Well, it's a novel, right? So you have to have a romance. So somehow I got to get Bay and Petter, who's got this pirate radio train. I have to get them together. That's kind of the story there. It's long and it's complicated. It has voices all over the place. So it's quite a thread, but the biggest compliment from reviewers is I did not believe this would make sense at the end, but I hung with it, and gosh darn it, it did. So I resolve it, but it's a lot of balls in the air, and it was a real challenge to put together. The one that's just came out in June is Wildcat and Appalachian Romance, and the speaker, who isn't me, might as well be. And I imagined in Lower Burrell there is a called a village called Braeburn, and Braeburn's down in the Allegheny River, and it's not isolated, but it's its own little thing. It used to have a coal mine, still has a steel mill that's still open, which is fascinating that that's even possible in Pittsburgh, but there it is. It's owned by a German company, I believe. There used to be a hotel. It burned down in 1969. There used to be a store. There used to be a post office. Those are gone. It's got essentially 4 streets. That's it. And it's just nestled down in this spot with a dam that doesn't do anything but be navigation dam for coal barges. And what I did was I tried to imagine what would it be like if I went back Braeburn, which is called Wildcat in this book, and I use Google Maps as my template. It's not historical fiction as in it's about Braeburn. But the map, if you could just use Google Maps, you can follow it on the book. I mean, I'm just using the map because that's what I do when I'm doing my place-based fiction. I imagined if the hotel was still there and I returned, how would I resolve the social and my own psychological contradictions, for one, along with the social problems of the Appalachian Rust Belt that happened, like when Pittsburgh lost 100,000 people and 25 steel mills in the 80s. And what if the town had done something that people think is magical but not unrealistic? They decided to completely cut themselves off from industrial capitalism and have their own sustainable village, to the most part. You know, you can get across the river, and there are some cars in town, and it's not like it's completely cut off, but they're pretty much self-contained. And so this guy moves into the hotel, and of course he's got an old girlfriend who is Madeline, who comes back because we got to have a romance. It's a novel, all that stuff. So there's that. And the last book, then this one's in June, is called Whiskey Rebel, and my project was to try and figure out if I could solve the problem of the American dream. and all of our infighting in the United States now in a weird little book. So it takes place in central Washington, the Columbia Basin Plateau. And the kind of conceit is that in 1794 we had our first rebellion against the United States. We tend to think of the Civil War as the big deal, but in Western Pennsylvania, my relatives, or people like them, not specifically, but certainly the Scots Irish, Alexander Hamilton said, you know what? We need to pay off our war debt to our veterans, because they weren't paying the veterans who they never paid during the Revolutionary War. And he told George, we need to have a whiskey tax. And they instituted a whiskey tax. And the people of Western Pennsylvania, who really weren't sure they wanted to be part of the United States, because they were really cut off from the rest of the country at this point, said, hell no. And the excise general, John Neville, they burned down the excise officer's house. They took up arms. Washington had to send in an army. I mean, they were serious. They couldn't take on an army, and that wasn't going to happen. And they all, took their lumps and whatever. But it was a serious deal, and they were seriously thinking of seceding from whatever they didn't really sure they want to be a part of. They left Scotland not to pay whiskey tax. That's ridiculous. And it's all that's in there. So real fast, it's a Iraqi war vet who got blown up in an IED, comes back to the United States. He's from the west side of Washington. And he goes to the east side, Pan and Gold, and he meets this drifter. He's not psychotic, but he's certainly hyperactive and strange, who wants to make tax-free whiskey. And so they team up and go out into the middle, essentially a desert. You can imagine going out there, nobody bother you because nobody wants to find you. And they make tax-free whiskey and collect a bunch of other characters along the way with their own issues. And that's what the novel's about, because they all have a different reason to be free.
Going back to your book now,
and it's not all the same one.
Of course, it's set in Western Pennsylvania, which is, of course, not far from where you lived once and where I lived for at least a couple of years. Why did you choose that particular location?
Yeah, for me, well, it's just because I used the village of Braeburn as a template, and I imagined I've always had I don't know much about the history of Braeburn because I was young, and so I was just fascinated with this place. And I just started doing a lot of research and found out a lot of the people in Braeburn didn't even necessarily know a lot of the history. It was very hard to track stuff down. I still don't know where the Catholic Church was. Even the Catholic Church hasn't been able to tell me at this point, but maybe I'll find out when I go back. I just wondered if I retired there, what would happen? And my brain just went from there. If the hotel was there and I moved in and I lived out the rest of my days in Braeburn, which is not a plan, my wife would be horrified.
Gonna say that on the horizon, you're gonna move back to Braeburn.
And the people of Braeburn would scratch their head too. What the hell's he doing here? But that happens in the novel. The people of Wildcat wonder, what the hell is this guy doing here? And they question him. They interrogate him on, we don't understand why you're here. It's okay. You brought your retirement money with you. Spend it. It's not a big deal. But what? Really?
Does your current book offer any insights into life in the 21st century as we know it today? Or do you get into that thing when you write a book? Do you try to tie in today, what we're living through today, with your book, or is that even an option?
As an artist, I think if you start from that point, you end up writing an essay, and it becomes pedantic. It becomes something that's tedious because you're trying to argue something, and an artist show, they don't tell. So once you start telling, it's a problem. My problem is when I have development or editors read through, they want me to add a little more of that in there because they think the readers are going, I don't understand why this is important. and I've learned how to do that better. But the first draft, I'm not thinking about that. And what I'm doing is I've created a setting, characters, and a situation. And now the characters and I are going to work this out. And I learn as we go. We get something done, we move on to the next thing. We get something done, we move on to the next thing. And they evolve, and I evolve with them. And when I come to the end, today, and this current one for that's going to be out next June, I put a different sentence on the end of it, because when I got to the end, it goes, "Oh, I thought that's better. That's more what this was about." So I added, you know, I've rewritten this thing 10 times. You read a first draft. And is it the same book? Kind of. It's totally reorganized. The tone's different. The points of view, the characters are different. There's way more backstory. I'm really excited once I got a hard copy to send you one.
So that begs the question. So how do you know that that version that you're at is the finished product? I mean, you could get to 10 drafts and think, oh, maybe no, it's not good enough. I'll do one or two more drafts. I mean, when do you know when to stop?
Every single time, this is me speaking, and it's just my psychology. I mean, I've learned that wherever I am is wherever I am. And when I'm done with something at this point, I'm done. And once it's published, because I can't control what a reader thinks. And a reader makes up a book that isn't the one I wrote. And I always remember as reviewers, the book the reviewer read isn't the one I wrote, because they have their own frame. They see things and they tell a story to themselves with all my words. And I love to hear what they have to say, because it's not what I thought, and that's fine. And it's instructive, because it's good for me to have some idea of what readers, are taking out of this. The other thing I can say is for people who are creative. Rick Rubin has a book called The Creative Act. Rick Rubin's famous music producer, brought Johnny Cash back to the world. Did the Beastie Boys, did a lot of rap, did a lot of rock music. He's a fascinating dude. But in his book, The Creative Act, he simply says, when you're done, you just let it go and move on to the next thing. Don't worry about it. And he's right. Once my publisher says, I think it's ready, and the developmental letters are saying that's enough, and because it's a hybrid publisher, I can just say it's enough because I'm paying for it. I have that power. Once you're there, you're done, and that's fine. And then you let your brain go somewhere else. And my brain's already working on something else, so that's fine.
After publishing one of your books, have you ever thought, oh, maybe I should have done it this way, or had a different ending or a different beginning, or no?
No, it's just done. There's no point. You'll make yourself nuts. You'll make yourself nuts. And I've known many a person who they go back and my first wife, bless her heart, was somebody who was forever going back and wondering what would happen if I did this, what would happen if I did that. Wildcat's kind of that book where I go back and I give myself the opportunity, like, what would happen if I did this? It's an alternate reality. But it's alternate. It's not real. That's fine.
So where can readers get your books? How do they find your books?
Sadly, 60% of books in America are sold on Amazon. So yes, there are links on Amazon. There they are. All 4 of them, soon to be 5 next year. They're all there on Amazon. Radio Free Olympia has a specific Amazon version, which is the exact same book, but it's cheaper because it's Amazon. They offer that kind of deal. It's a little bigger book, so it's a little more expensive. Ingram Spark, what that means is if you go into any independent bookstore, Barnes and Noble, whatever, go into any bookstore, ask about it, they can order it. And they order through Ingram Spark. So that's the biggest worldwide distributor. So the 2 biggest places to find it, one is ask your independent bookstore, please. I want to keep independent bookstores alive. But if not, Amazon's sure darn easy, and it just shows up at your door. So there you go.
I don't know. In the final 9 or so minutes, do you have any questions for me?
Questions for you. Talk about your thoughts. This is your first shot at podcasting. I was once a radio DJ, and I was once an FM radio music director. And I'm fairly comfortable with, I've got this big fat microphone in front of my face. So I'm comfortable with that. I'm dyslexic, so when I'm thinking, I close my eyes, I don't do eye contact. So I don't like doing YouTube videos or any of that crap. But that's just me, and other people are brilliant at it. So you want to go from journalism all print and you're going to go into the voice world. Talk about that. That's a whole new ball game, kettle of fish.
Very much so. 5, 10 years ago, I would have said no way. But I think I'm just more relaxed now, probably better at it. I did this podcast with a cultural entertainment critic in Des Moines back in February. And that was interesting. Really, the first time I'd done it, and I mean that was live. Well, it wasn't live. I mean, it actually aired later. But so I went downtown Des Moines. It's an interesting place. It's called Mainframe Studio, where they have artists of all different ilks show up and do their thing at this one big building in separate rooms, that they can rent. I guess it's all rented space. And so did it down there, and then I did a podcast with a Chicago baseball guy a couple months later about the book. And I did the radio interview last week with Charity Nevy, Iowa Public Radio. So I'm getting more used to it. It's just another way to get your message out there. I can see why people do it. That's why in a nutshell, I guess.
I predict that if you find this fun, because my publisher, his last question is always, are you having fun? Because if you're paying a lot of money and you're not having fun, that's a really stupid thing, and we need to stop this. If you're having fun along with the baseball, you are so interested in and have connections with Iowa history that you could do, once a week. You could have guests in. You could talk about all sorts of things all across Iowa and build a following. I mean, it's all, in my mind, it's all kind of really exciting. Of course, it's my life, not yours. But I'm just thinking, it just seems like, like a whole new chapter that one could have in your life that would really be cool for people around you, that you could build a following. People look forward to learning more. It's place based.
There's a lot of fascinating history. Des Moines alone, the head of
Yeah, and every place does.
the head of the State Historical Society Museum in Des Moines, Leo Landis. We saw each other about a month ago down there at the research center, and I introduced myself, and he said he'd like to have me on maybe around the World Series time in a podcast talking about the book and baseball. They do weekly podcasts about all sorts of Iowa historical topics. So I know a Bill Sherman in my Golden K Kiwanis Club. He's an expert on one-room schoolhouses in Iowa. He knows everything about the one-room schoolhouses that were pretty prevalent in Iowa until the 1950s, when they started consolidating all these small schools. Iowa at one time probably had the most one-room schoolhouses in the country, because there was a state law that they had to have so many public schools within a certain distance. So, it was, and being mainly a rural state, especially back before Des Moines became so big, the state was just, I shouldn't say littered, but dotted with one-room schoolhouses. There's even people in the Kiwanis Club here that went to run one-room schoolhouses. They're old enough to have gone to a one-room schoolhouse when they were young, at least for the first 8 grades, and then they probably went to a consolidated high school. So yeah, there's a lot of opportunity out there.
Fascinating to do a series, like you do a show with 15 to 20 minutes and do like 3 people who went to one-room schoolhouses and just do memories. Go to do one for every town in Iowa, every little and places that may not even exist anymore, that are just crossroads now. And you could do an episode for every. I mean, it's endless the amount of fun you could have with this.
Well, I know when they built the lock and dam in Keokuk, Iowa, that the river got much wider because they flooded, of course, everything upstream when they built the dam, and that covers a few towns that had been where the river was. Those towns don't exist anymore.
And if there's anybody who remembers that, I just don't know. But it's all fascinating, and I think we're starved for that, because in this post-industrial digital world, like, the past doesn't exist anymore. I mean, we've lost a sense of home. We've lost our roots. It's Karl Marx called it alienation. and we've done like Alienation Cubed, but we're totally unaware of it anymore because it's become natural. It's like you see kids on their phones, or old people on their phones for that matter, who think they're living in the real world, and they're not. We've lost touch. So I think you're doing the world a service. Good for you.
We'll see how far it goes. I don't know. Something else to do in my retirement.
Run with it, bro. Yeah.
Well, it's been great having you on my first podcast, Jeff.
Sure. Why not?
Maybe we can do another one about something else sometime down the road. I don't know what. Yeah. Okay. And the Mariners, Seattle Mariners.
Baseball memories. You'll do the Cubs. I can do the Pirates. Whatever. Whatever.
Well, I'll wrap it up here. And as I said before, I'm going to have at least a couple more podcasts in the near future talking to Sam Burnaby, the
Yep, sure. A little bit.
president and general manager of the Iowa Cubs. He's been with the franchise actually all his adult life, and that's about 40-some years. And then John Lieppa, a noted Iowa baseball historian, lives in Des Moines. He's got a fantastic collection of memorabilia, mainly Iowa related. It's so valuable that he keeps some of it in a bank in a neighboring town and only gets it out for special occasions. And he's also brokered big baseball card deals, like for 5 figures worth one card. So he knows his stuff. And we'll see. I've been in contact with this Jim Marshall, a 92-year-old former baseball player, coach, and he worked for the Diamondbacks for a long time, even up to the pandemic. I might get him on there. He's real
cool,
eager guy, even at 92. So we'll see if he'll do one. And he even played in Japan. I'm sure he's got lots of good stories. With that, I'll sign off. Have a good day, Jeff. Thanks for doing this. Appreciate it. Yep, bye.
Very good. Thank you for your time, sir. Bye-bye.